to Advocate Today. I'm Tracy E. Gilchrist. Senate Republicans have blocked the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment 100 years after it was introduced. The ERA passed 50 years ago, but still needed approval from 38 states to become a constitutional amendment. The approval did finally come from 38 states, but only after the constitutional deadline. The ERA bill would remove that provision. It passed in the House earlier this year, but GOP senators argued that the amendment is not needed because of the equal protections provided to women in the 14th Amendment. Advocates say the ERA would protect women by banning discrimination and guaranteeing equality under the Constitution. The failure of the ERA to pass in the Senate is a major setback for equal rights advocates who'd hoped it would become a landmark achievement in the fight for gender equality. I spoke with ERA advocate and attorney Kate Kelly about the fight for equal rights and the work being done to push forward these constitutional protections. Hi, welcome Kate Kelly, attorney and ERA advocate. Thank you so much for joining me here today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, I'm excited to dive into what's going on with the ERA because it's now been 100 years since it was introduced, and it's yet to pass.
There hasn't been movement in Congress on the Equal Rights Amendment for about over 40 years. And so the vote in the Senate was the first full Senate vote on the floor on the ERA in decades. And it was very exciting, although of course, we know that the filibuster is the enemy to all things good. It did not meet the threshold to overcome the filibuster. It was a cloture motion vote to overcome the filibuster and bring the bill to the floor. It did get 51 votes. It would have actually gotten 53, but Feinstein wasn't present. And the majority leader, he removed his vote in order to preserve the motion and send it back to committee. So essentially, it has at least 53 votes in the Senate, which honestly is not too bad. All things considered, both Collins and Murkowski supported and voted for the bill and are co-sponsors. So it does have bipartisan support even today.
Incredible. Well, I wonder, I want to take a step back for a moment, and would you share, if this were to pass, what sort of rights would that enshrine for women?
Yeah, so I think important to note that it did pass. It passed in 1972, yes. And that's the only requirement under the Article 5 of the Constitution to amend the Constitution. So it has passed. What the bill in the Senate would do is eliminate that initial deadline so that those 3 additional states count. Because a lot of people are arguing the 3 states don't count because they're after the deadline or they're in the modern era. I virulently disagree. And so that's what this bill would do. Basically erase any doubt and say those states count, and it is the 28th Amendment. I think women, especially queer women, are obviously the folks who serve the most to gain the most from the Equal Rights Amendment. People most on the margins are the ones who have always been fighting for the ERA. I wrote a book about the ERA called Ordinary Equality, and the people I talk about in the book are ones seldom mentioned in history, including Polly Murray, Barbara Jordan, queer icons who have been fighting who fought for constitutional equality, but you don't really hear their names attached to the ERA as much. So queer people and women of color have always fought for it because we have the most to gain. And I think one very clear example in recent history is the Dobbs decision. So the Dobbs decision overturned longstanding precedent Roe versus Wade that legalized abortion nationwide. We can now see that our Constitution is not sufficient. We do not have an equality amendment in our Constitution, which enabled the current Supreme Court justices to overturn Roe versus Wade. They got out their copy of the Constitution and they're like, I'm looking through here and I don't see any equality amendments, and gender equality is not part of the Constitution. And unfortunately, they're right. It's not. We never got the ERA across the finish line, and it's not. So I think that's one very concrete example, abortion access and reproductive freedom. If we had an equal rights amendment, if we had an equality clause in the Constitution, it would not be possible to deny us abortion rights and access.
Well, thank you. And, the GOP is, I would say, probably more cravenly against the ERA than ever because
because of this reason, because of, wanting to deny people access to abortion, especially. Would you talk about that and how you see it playing out over the next election cycle?
Listen, the people who follow the ERA the closest are not equality advocates. The people who follow the ERA the closest are people who are against equality. Republicans follow it, the minutia. They follow every step in the court case. They follow every little procedure. They follow every additional state that ratifies. The reason they pay such close attention, including National Right to Life Committee, that's one of the groups that follows the ERA so closely. And the reason they follow it is they know its potential.
Yeah.
Equality advocates and progressive folks aren't as on board with the ERA, ironically, as the people trying to fight it. And so, the folks who are trying to not only deny us our rights, but also strip us of rights we already have, they closely follow the Equal Rights Amendment. They know it is popular. They know equality is popular. I'll give you one electoral example that I think shines a light on future happenings. I spent several months this most recent election in Nevada. I moved to Las Vegas. I live in DC, but I moved to Vegas and I worked on their state level ERA. So states can also have an Equal Rights Amendment in their constitutions, and Nevada was the 27th state to add one. In Nevada, the Equal Rights Amendment doesn't just say on account of sex. In Nevada, their constitution now bans discrimination on the basis of race, color, creed, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, race, nationality, and age. So there are like all these categories, including gender identity and expression. It's the first time that gender identity and certainly gender expression have been enshrined in a constitution anywhere in the world. And so they passed that. We had, we fought the good fight in Nevada, and in an election where the Democratic governor lost, the Democratic lieutenant governor lost. Senator Cortez Masto was like razor thin. That's one of the elections a lot of people were watching. She barely scraped by. The Equality Amendment won by 58.8%. So equality is popular. It is wildly popular. Again, even in a state that's not solidly blue, a state that defeated Democrats statewide, they voted overwhelmingly for the ERA. And so I think that's one example that demonstrates its popularity with people. Once they understand what it is, once they are given the opportunity to vote on it, it's wildly popular. So the same thing is happening in New York. New York has passed twice in their legislature a state level Equal Rights Amendment that includes pregnancy and pregnancy outcomes. So it's very specific about protecting abortion. That will be on the ballot in 2024, and I think will really raise the profile. And I think one thing that, even though we didn't overcome the filibuster in this vote, I think one thing it does is help people get thinking like, wait, what is this? We can still get the ERA, like, is that a possibility?
Right.
And if we got enough senators, like, we could have it. That is possible. It is possible for the Equal Rights Amendment to happen. In fact, my position is that the Equal Rights Amendment is the 28th Amendment because we've met the requirements, 2/3, both houses and 38 states. And President Biden could, under statute, President Biden could certify and publish the Equal Rights Amendment. There's an archivist of the United States. That's their job. Currently, it's an acting archivist. Her name is Deborah Wall. So we got a woman in there. And, she could just go ahead and certify and publish. And I think if there was enough momentum, if enough people, if the bigoted anti-equality people, if we knew as much as they do about the ERA, I think we would fight for it even harder.
Thank you so much to Kate for her insight on the ERA. You can find more coverage on the Advocate Channel's YouTube page or advocatechannel.com. I'm Tracy E. Gilchrist, and I'll see you next time.